abbiamo parlato di modelli rigenerativi. La Regeneration Society Foundation sta sviluppando un modello per le imprese e parte dal benessere, come abbiamo accennato prima, e torna al benessere. È un ciclo virtuoso. Vi invito a prendere il posto e a connettervi qua. Allora, nel prossimo panel ne parleranno del modello. Abbiamo Lara Aknin che si collega da remoto e che è psicologa canadese, professoressa alla Simon Fraser University. Lei è redattore del World Happiness Report, per cui ne sa qualcosa su cosa ci rende autenticamente felici. E anche la prova che la gentilezza funziona. Insieme a lei chiamo qui Carlo Carraro, Maurizio Zollo e Federico Frattini. Carlo Carraro è rettore emerito e professore di economia ambientale all'Università Ca' Foscari a Venezia, sì, prendete posto, e ha un bacino di esperienza molto ampio, per cui porta sia la prospettiva delle Nazioni Unite che del World Economic Forum e del bacino mediterraneo, e porterà la sua visione del cambiamento. Maurizio Zollo è professore di strategia e sostenibilità anche lui all'Imperial College, alla Business School, e è direttore scientifico del Leonardo Center for Business for Society, che vanta l'accesso a un database veramente ampio e unico nel suo genere, perché include 2 milioni di iniziative di sostenibilità aziendale e porterà dei casi molto concreti. Modera, con il pensiero analitico, il professor Frattini, che è rettore del Graduate School of Management del Politecnico di Milano, esperto di strategie di innovazione. A voi.
Grazie. I took some notes while I was listening to the previous speeches, which in my view can be a good introduction for our conversation. First message I bring with myself, which I agree 100%, shift toward regeneration is badly needed, but not at some point in time, now or never. First big message I bring with myself. Second message, regeneration is a big, dramatic shift from the last 20 years of discussion and practice that I will be hearing from Maurizio of sustainability in businesses. I call these 20 years of sustainability in the world of business the era of the low-hanging fruits of sustainability, because they were based on 3 main aspects: measuring ESG impact, compliance with standard, compensation of the negative externalities that searching for more profits bring with itself. But we all know that this has only scratched the surface. The picture has not changed. So message 4, I perfectly agree on the fact that regeneration requires the involvement of businesses. Only businesses have the scale, have the resources, have the capability to drive the kind of transformation we are needed for. And we need businesses that understand and practice sustainability in a completely different way. If we want to say it in a word, we need businesses whose strategic plan is not different from their sustainability plan. They need to be exactly the same. They need to be exactly the same document. But, and this is the topic of our conversation, as we already agreed on, businesses change towards sustainability only if regeneration becomes a driver of economic value and economic wealth. No moral issues, no standards, no B Corp, no ISO will be enough. Only if we prove that regeneration becomes a driver of long-term economic wealth, this transformation will be happen at scale. But we need to be honest with ourselves. The capability to turn regeneration into economic value is not equally distributed and is very complicated. There are many businesses that combine regeneration with economic wealth, and are those businesses that we all here have in our minds, but we need to be honest. And then I know Maurizio will say something about this. There are many other businesses which have never found a way to combine regeneration with economic wealth. And you know why? In my view, and based on my research and experience, it's because combining regeneration with economic wealth requires a completely different leadership approach, HR practices, innovation strategies, skills, and unluckily, because I'm the dean of maybe the largest business school in Italy in terms of how many students we train every year, this is not taught in business schools. There are around 10 million people studying in business schools in 2025. There are 16,000 business schools in the world. And believe me, these topics are not covered in their MBA, executive MBA programs, master programs, and the depth that they would require. And I always remember to myself, as Nelson Mandela said, that education is the most powerful weapon we have to change the world. So I want to bring into this conversation the role of universities, of business schools in teaching what is needed to combine regeneration with economic wealth, because it's not straightforward, it's not happening anytime, and it requires completely different managerial skills, tools, and processes. I don't know what you think, Lara, Maurizio, Carlo, on the regenerative business model framework. We can have a first round of discussion on your thoughts, your feelings on the model, and then we can go more into the topic of the panel. Lara, would you like to start? Thank you for joining us.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Thank you for accommodating me from afar and speaking in English for me. I really appreciate it. I am a social psychologist by training, and so I work with folks in business schools, but I must say that, you know, this regeneration model and its values and its main vision really resonates with my understanding of a lot of human behavior from a psychological perspective. Some of the work that I'll actually mention that I think kind of brings me to understand and think through this model is actually from someone at a business school, but he's a psychologist by training, which is Adam Grant, who talks a lot about pro-social purpose and pro-social motivation at work, and in particular how it can be a very strong motivating force for employees, because my focus is primarily at the individual level. And I think we can unpack this more through the conversation if you like, but he's conducted a number of studies with many colleagues showing that when people feel a larger sense of purpose and contribution in their work, he studied it primarily from an individual perspective, but I think this also translates to how people see the broader understanding of how they fit within the environment and can support the environment. That motivates them to continue to work hard and to go above and beyond, if you will. So he measures pro-social purpose and motivation with questions like, I come to work and I'm motivated to work because I care about benefiting other people. And like I said, this predicts commitment and persistence in a diverse range of outcomes and professions. Some of my favorite work looks at this in firefighters and in fundraisers. People who see that their work is valuable and meaningful to others in the bigger picture are more likely to contribute. Firefighters work more overtime hours, fundraisers make more calls and raise more money. But I think it's important to underscore that a lot of these key findings seem to emerge if and only if people feel that these values are freely chosen. And so I think that's one kind of important wrinkle in these conversations, which is, you know, having the structure for a regenerative model is extremely important. But I think it must, you know, it needs to speak to core values and people's personal sensibilities. I think if it feels forced upon them, it might not always manifest and lead to the outcomes that are expected. And so maybe I'll stop there because I can't see the timer, but I'll return back if there's more time.
Come back to the second round of questions. Thank you very much. You already touched upon the individual level of this transformation toward regeneration, but I'd like to ask Carlo, what do you think on the model? What are your thoughts on the assumptions on which it is based?
I think that the main ideas of the business model have been presented. There can be no sustainability without regeneration. Firms, companies are the heart of the process, and they are destined for the success of this model. The positive note I would like to bring is that we have many examples that this is going to work. And indeed, we can see the glass half full rather than half empty as far, for example, CO2 emissions are concerned. It is true they are increasing, but it's also true that in most countries, most developed countries, they're going down. In Europe, in the US, in UK, Japan, Australia, emissions went down. And why did they go down? Because innovation brought technologies, and these technologies became cheaper and cheaper, and now they are so cheap that there is an incentive to invest into this direction and to use these technologies rather than the old ones, the fossil-based technologies. This is true for solar photovoltaic technologies, costing now 120 with respect to what they costed 20 years ago. Batteries, 110 with respect to 10 years ago. But even simple technologies like LED light bulbs are now costing 90% less than what they costed 10 years ago. So this is the main change, driven by research and development, driven by investment by companies, and the price is so low that there is not even reason to incentivize the adoption of these technologies, because they are really profitable, and denying this profitability is an exercise that, of course, fossil fuel companies sometimes try, but difficult to go against the numbers. So we have examples of this, of the change that we can introduce in the economic system in a way that the impact on nature, ecosystem, biodiversity, wellness is improved. The impact, the negative impact that we build over time is improved. Not all technologies are available. Some of them are not yet available. If we look at the IPCC scenarios, or even the recent decision by the European Commission to introduce this 2040 scenario, the minus 90% of CO2 emission in 2040, which is more ambitious than the simple linear reduction to zero in 2050. They wanted to do something more, but this something more is based on technologies that we don't have yet. It's based mostly on removing CO2 from the atmosphere. Yes. Which is different from capturing, because capturing is something that has to do with the flow of emission. Now what we want to deal with is a stock of emission. And to remove CO2 from the atmosphere and reduce it, it's a way of regenerating the atmosphere. You want to reproduce or recreate the atmosphere that we had 150 or 200 years. It's a regeneration process of the atmosphere. And this is a goal which is understandable, but the technologies are under development in, say, there is a plant in Iceland, another one in California. There is a nice one with a new startup, Otavia Carbon, in Kenya. There are ideas around the world, but far, far away from solving the problem that will be probably solved in the next 50 or 60 years. But my first point is there are good examples of what innovation and competition across companies can deliver. Second point, which is also in the regenerative business model, that there is, I don't know whether you read the document, but I invite you to read it as soon as you can, or as soon as you will deliver in the website. There is a point on investment, and on important to increase investments, and there is a plea to have at least 1.52% of GDP invested every year in regeneration and transition and green tech and all these technologies that we need. By the way, good news, we already have these investments, because last year we achieved 2 trillion of investment in clean tech. So if this is the plea, we are there. So I think that the text should be revised, this is a suggestion, by talking about additional investments. So the share of the GDP that should be invested in this technology from the transition to generation should be between 3 and 4% of GDP, because the 2% is already achieved. And this is also the suggestion that comes from international organizations, because from the IPCC to UN and so on and so forth, including the drug report. If you do the drug report for Europe and Italy, it shows clearly that the 400 billions per year that are invested now in Italy should be doubled and achieve the 800 billion per year that we need in order to go through the process that we're all talking about, we're all considering. There is an issue which is missing or not sufficiently emphasized in the business model, which is the distributional impact of this change. And distributional impact means that the change is going to be very uneven. unequal. Impacts are going to be very different in developed countries versus developing countries, in some sectors versus other sectors, for some households with respect to other households. And these distribution effects are the main reason why there is a delay. It's not because policymakers are short-termists. It's not because we don't understand, we don't see, we don't know. There are conflicting interests, and conflicting interests are the ones that block the changes that we all need. So a deeper analysis of these distribution effects, these uneven effects, both of impacts of climate change and other negative environmental dimensions, and of the transition and regeneration and all of the investment what we need. I mean, these unequal distributions are important. I'll come back on this topic when we'll talk in the second part of this panel, because I would like to give you some numbers that help clarifying what we need to do, both international level and at the national level.
Thank you so much. Technology view after the individual view. Maybe Maurizio, would you like to add the business view on the regenerative business model framework?
Yes. Well, first of all, I'm building on a fantastic panel that we had, and a lot of the ideas that I will share hopefully will provide scientific evidence supporting that's the good news, supporting the concepts and the examples that already have been shared. At the Imperial, and the data has already been mentioned. We've been working, by the way, not just for this is about 12 years, we've developed this data set, focusing incredibly on a simple idea that has not been really followed. Rather than evaluating companies, which is the standard, and all the ESG ratings and so on, evaluating actions, right? Initiatives. So we've developed, obviously, machine learning-based methodology to extract from every sustainability report that we have on the internet. Currently, we're above more than 100,000 of them. Each and every piece of the text that describes the initiative, the action that has already been taken, not promises, not commitments, but actions have already been taken. And then they have been classified across the 17 SDGs in terms of the goal, right? Because every action obviously has a goal. And in terms of type of behavior. This is key, because the behavior is actually, first of all, visible, and you can also build a model of maturity, of essentially strategic value of these actions. So these 2 million actions by 20,000 companies over a couple of decades, obviously not all the 20,000, right? But there's been a very, very sharp increase over the last 5 to 10 years. But what does it say? And 50%, okay, so about 1 million, are essentially advocacy actions, donations, communications. Nice things that, certainly builds or are aimed at creating or reducing, if you want, the reputational risk. Might actually be doing a lot of good things for local communities, but that might be questionable whether they actually are sort of not connected necessarily with the strategy of the company. There is, I'll give you the other extreme, innovation. So it's already been mentioned many times. Sustainability-driven innovation, as of today, is about 4% of that 2 million. It's not trivial, right? It's not zero, but you understand, right? And what's there in the middle? Basically, there are a lot of preparation actions, what you were describing, Federico. The measurements, the reporting, the training, right? All things that are not useless, okay? I mean, there are necessary steps. By themselves, they do not change the way the company works, obviously, right? So we call them preparation steps. And so what we have done, by the way, there is another 15% that is about organizational change, whether it's structural, cultural, operational change, okay? So you can put together the 15 and the 4, roughly, 1 out of 5, potentially can have an impact on the way the company works, 1 out of 5. So what we did then is put ourselves in the shoes of investors, shareholders, but even banks, anyone. People with money who might give it to a company. And we created portfolios of companies that have divided in quartile for each of these 3 categories, right? So the advocacy, the preparation, and the we call transformational. And it turns out that of all those portfolios, the only one that not only creates more value than all the others, but actually beats significantly the market returns. So investors in the portfolio of transformational champions, right? Companies that they do a lot more than average in terms of their innovation, sustainability-driven innovation, top quartile. If you select only that, they create, for those of you who understand finance, an alpha, which is essentially a significantly higher returns compared to market rates, controlling for all the other types of risk. That's critical. All right? So this is a very sophisticated, cutting-edge financial model that controls for all the other known risks, and it still produces 2.6% per year, which over 13 years is something like 38% additional returns, only by selecting the companies that actually are doing it, in a strategic way. Okay? This to me is an amazingly important signal, result if you want. First of all, because it's the first one that actually identifies what companies, not just investors, need to do, right? So there are 2 major, massive, let's say, repositioning, transition that is happening, that needs to happen with these based on these numbers. One, of course, from the global financial markets, who can adopt this behavioral approach rather than the ESG, and I'll tell you a few more things about the ESG and why they don't work. But there is essentially an adoption of this logic in order to select companies to invest on. But also equally fundamental for all the other sectors of the real economy, a massive transition away from the, maybe not completely away from the advocacy piece, right? There's basically, might still be a logic there, but it's very clear that that's where the trade-off is, right? Impact versus profit, that's the area where there's a trade-off. Whereas on the other side, innovation, organizational change, or at least most of the actions are actually producing synergies between impact and profit. This is a fundamental way to rethink. Now, why is it that ESG ratings as of today don't work? We've done correlational analysis, a number of other things to understand what's the difference basically between these new indices, behavioral indices, vis-a-vis the ESG, and the answer is actually startlingly clear. ESG do exactly what they're supposed to be doing. Why they are created? They were created in the 90s to help investors manage risk, right? Manage environmental risk, social risk, governance risk, right? And that's fine, that's what they're doing. But they forget that, of course, sustainability is not just about risk management, it's about creating value. And in fact, they correlate positively with all the actions that you were talking about. They correlate positively with the preparation, the intermediate step. But they correlate negatively with the transformational actions. Not just neutral, negative.
No, Maurizio.
That's...
I will leave the floor to you a little bit later, a few minutes, because we're running out of time, if I understand, and Lara has to leave. So we need to maybe have a second round of question and answer on the topic of this panel, because the panel is about how to transform. I think it really complements other panels of today and tomorrow on governance, vision, finance. It's really about the agency and the leadership that is needed to trigger this change. And we have here three perspectives: the individual level, business level, system level. So can you say something, Lara, about what triggers changes in individual behaviors toward higher levels of sustainability, based on your research, of course?
Yes, I'll be brief because I know we're short on time and I've really enjoyed hearing everyone's thoughts. In one key factor that I think would promote a lot of this behavior is well-being. That's another kind of virtue. It's a key component of the regenerative model as I read it. And I just wanted to highlight kind of what I've heard on this panel already is that there are some synergies between this environmental behavior and company, business, tech success. I just wanted to echo that I think there's a lot of evidence from the psychological literature, but also from other domains showing there's a parallel with individual well-being. A lot of my research has documented over the past decade or so that people feel good when we help other people, and the same seems to be true when we help the environment. There's correlational evidence showing that the more people engage in what we call pro-environmental behavior, the higher their life satisfaction. There are also experiments showing that when people do kind things for the environment, that promotes their happiness. But on the specific point to your question, which is what triggers these kinds of behaviors, I also wanted to highlight there's this virtuous cycle or positive feedback loop between well-being and these kind behaviors, both to other humans, but also to the environment. And so the greater a person's life satisfaction or their momentary happiness, the more likely they are to engage in these other-oriented and pro-environmental behaviors. And so I think that's kind of a nice virtuous cycle that helps propel this forward.
Thank you so much. So happiness is one important driver of transformation at the individual level. What do you think, Carlo, at the system level? Because these changes requires, as we saw, multiple shifts at different levels of action and analysis.
Multiple shifts, multiple actions, multiple actors. It was already underlined. We don't need only firms and companies, we need citizens, and we need governments as well. And all those actors are strongly interlinked because consumers, citizens can affect companies by changing their own consumption behavior. And that's going to have a large impact. But it can also influence policymakers. If we pay more attention when we vote, and someone also mentioned this earlier, and the voting decision take into account more deeply, more consistently, the environmental dimension of all these different discussions that we have today, because environment is too restrictive. There is more than environment. But then policymakers would behave differently. So, and we need policymakers as well, because it is clear that the problems we're talking about, in particular climate change, is the biggest market failure in history. It's clearly a market failure, and the failure by companies to address the problem. And so we need policy, and we need vision and policy, and we need the measures like taxations or industrial policy or whatever we want to figure out in order to solve the problem. But we need to do it very carefully, because it is true that the whole thing works if there is value creation. You're right about it. And which means that the pie at the end of the story is bigger for everyone. But the pie is bigger, but it's going to be badly distributed. It is already badly distributed. It's going to be worse because of climate change, because of the problems we are talking about. So attention must be paid to weaker components of the population, in particular in developing countries. And developed countries have the responsibility through investment plans to help developing nations. This is very important, otherwise there will not be the consensus to go through the right direction. And the same is true for some industrial sector in which workers are opposing changes because they are losing. And we need to tackle this problem in a very consistent manner with a long-term vision. I think that I really believe that the transition, the regeneration process is going to deliver at the end of the story an improvement of quality life, of well-being, and even income. But the pathway is very complicated, and in particular is going to hurt a lot of people, and this is not going to offset the benefits of the other ones, of the population that will gain by the change.
Thank you so much. Maurizio, how can we drive businesses to do not only 4% of their sustainability initiative as real transformative one, but maybe 50% of them or even higher?
First of all, the moment they understand these results that have just come out, obviously there's a question of communication. For all our learning to communicate and building the right kind of narratives is absolutely essential, right? So the more the faster they understand this, that by doing certain type of things, actually you can create both impact and profit. Obviously that will accelerate the behavioral change. But that's not enough, right? That's only one way to think about the transition, right? Basically sustainability action. The question, as you were putting it at the very beginning, is the integration with the standard operating actions, right? The business growth and strategies. We need to think in terms of a maturity growth stages. I think that's how we are developing and starting to measure and test different stages of maturity, which include, of course, the risk minimization as a second stage after obviously the exploitation one, the extractive one. Then there is the sustainability stage, where at least there's an objective of minimizing negative impact on the environment and on society. And the regenerative state is the fourth. There's actually, in our view, even a more advanced, we call it systemic enterprise, which is, as of today, almost non-existent, except for the new generations of enterprises, right? But existing companies that transition from level 1 to level 5, we haven't seen any. I'll give you just one example of a company that has been able to make the transition, at least on the regenerative one, which is Schneider Electric. Schneider Electric has been, over the last 2 or 3 years, considered the benchmark across sectors at a global level. The interesting thing is that, so they started their transition 20, 25 years ago. The interesting thing is that about 3 years ago, the CEO, they had a new CEO, he actually did not believe in sustainability. And he emphasized it from a strategic standpoint. So you would imagine, okay, that's over, right? Actually, the company was able to maintain the emphasis, the sustainability strategies. Well, they were completely integrated with their growth, maintained. That CEO, within 18 months, was replaced again. And essentially, it's the culture of the organization that really becomes the guarantee of steady and accelerating transformation. At the end of the day, we go from leadership and governance and strategy, but it goes into the cultural transition. That's the fundamental logic. It has to be part of the
regeneration has to be ingrained into the corporate
the
culture. Okay. Otherwise, it's not going to last, maybe. Okay, I don't know how many time we have left, but I think we're getting closer to the end. I'm not sure when we started, so if we want to collect, maybe, do we have time? One or few questions for our panelists from the audience.
Grazie, thank you. My name is Isabella Zvak, and I have a question for Dr. Aknin, because we've touched today a couple of times on the fact that we as human beings are a big part of the problem. And I was thinking, as I was listening to all of the conversations today, I was thinking about, we've taken a photograph of what the situation is, we've looked at the what, we've looked at the how. But what I'm really curious about is the why. And what I mean is, if we're speaking about regenerative societies or ecosystems, I'm not sure I can scientifically claim that biology is inherently coherent and not chaotic. And therefore, one would presume that human beings are also inherently coherent. So why is it that we have organized ourselves in systems, be it schools, governments, companies, which in fact do not represent or reflect what our basic biological needs and aspirations are? So my question is, why? What is it about is it something about our culture? Is it something, I know you've studied a lot other cultures and how they've organized themselves. Is there something about our culture that has made us turn against ourselves? Thank you.
Just one moment, Lara, because we are not hearing you. Can you try now?
Hello?
Yeah, now it's perfect.
All right, great. I was saying that's a great question, and it's a big question, and I will do my best to answer it. I don't know if there's one coherent answer to the question about coherence in human behavior, but I wager that it has something to do with the complexity of this question. There has been some great work trying to understand why humans can't fully comprehend the challenges of climate change. And some of it has boiled down to, at least from a psychological perspective, that, we as human beings are over years and years of human evolution, we're designed to focus on the here and now, both in terms of time and space. And so we're designed to focus on our more our close communities and where we are living now. It's not to say that we can't plan for the future, but that takes extra time and attention. I also don't think our brains usually think about the scope of this question that is both incredibly large in size and incredibly large in terms of space. And so I think part of it just has to do with these are big, wicked challenges that I think the average person, probably their day-to-day life, does not interact with these big questions. That being said, I do think that there's a lot of work suggesting that our human nature has both this sense for survival, which in times of difficulty can force this more competitive, this more egoistic, this more selfish perspective. But a lot of my research, not just in North America, but around the world, has shown that we as humans also have a very communal, collective, pro-social interest as well. And so what I read this model as, and maybe it's based on my training and the research I've done, is trying to help humans, businesses, companies in the world try to think about how to lean on that pro-social regenerative side and show the complementarity between the individual benefits, the company benefits, but also what that means for other people. I hope that helps address the question.
This is everything is so interesting. I think we have this we're split between the here and now, and then we're told that we never live in the here and now because we're either afraid of something that happened or preoccupied about what will happen next. But maybe it's just an ode to living communities and companies as communities and facing the challenges together. That is, I think maybe we should, in fact, that's a question for our business leaders later. How do we couple competition and collaboration? Because we're at a time where I think we need collaboration more than ever. So going together, working together, and competing as bigger conglomerates. Because otherwise, if you're fighting for yourself, then you enter that fight and flight survival mode, and that throws our whole system into chaos. But having said that, I don't know, maybe do we have time for why don't we shorten the break just by a few minutes if there's a couple more questions? One more question. It's up to you, sorry, I'm going to sit back here.
No problem. I think they need the coffee because no one is raising a hand.
No one's raising their hand? Okay, so we do have a 20-minute coffee break, and there is a stand that 3B has created. If everyone would like to pass by and answer a quick questionnaire on the role of biodiversity credits. We'll see you back punctually in 20 minutes. Thank you.
Grazie.
Grazie
Thank you
a
very
voi.
much. Thank you, Lara. Thank you. Grazie.
Grazie a voi.